A little birdie told me that some of us were struggling, thinking about what to do in this broken world we have right now. And I don't think that we have to look very far to find those of us who are doing that struggling. I know it's true for me, and maybe it's true for you as well. So I want to talk about that tonight. I want to talk about how we're seeing so much brokenness around us. And we see corruption, we hear lies, we're witness to a government that will use the powers of government against us if we are not in alignment with the leaders. Those are hard things to deal with. And we might all be wondering what Zen has to say about this. It's a big problem. What does our Zen practice have to offer? Zen was born in really difficult times. So our early Zen masters developed a lot of techniques that we can use now to help us. Because in 8th and 9th century China, for instance, things were really brutal. You think we've got it bad. Turn the clock back a few centuries, and they had it much, much worse. Our Zen ancestors knew how to do diligent practice that led to clear insights that leads to skillful action. It was pertinent back then, and it's pertinent now. Tonight, I want to bring two main things forward for us to consider. One is modern. It's the science of what our brain does. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating and helpful. And the second is ancient. It's what does our practice, our Zen practice, have to offer in this world? So between the two of these, science of the brain and the history of our practice, I'm hoping that we'll come away with a little bit better sense of how we can practice diligently, have deep insights, and then use that to act in this broken world. Sound okay? Okay. Well, I want to start by sharing one of my favorite Zen stories. And I come back to this story over and over and over. And I come back to it because it's fascinated me for decades. And I think it's particularly useful for us in this subject. So the story is about Zen master Hakuin. Hakuin Zenji, we call him. He lived in Japan many centuries ago. And he was the abbot of a small monastery in a small village. And Hakuin was a very talented person. He was an excellent poet and calligrapher and writer and teacher of Zen. And he attracted slowly over time many students that came to work with him. They loved his clarity. He was very direct. One day, right in the middle of his life as a Zen teacher and a poet and a calligrapher, there was a bang, bang, bang on the monastery door. And he opened the door, and outside was a young woman holding a baby, and behind her was her family and many of the villagers. And this young woman's father said, "Hakuin, this is your baby. You take it and you raise it." He was being accused of fathering this child. And what was Hakuin's response? He said, "Oh, is that so?" And he took the baby. And the mother and her family and the villagers turned their back and walked away. Well, imagine what those monks who are the students of Hakuin thought. What? This celibate monk has been going into the village and having sex with these young women and now he's caught? I'm not having him as my teacher. I am out of here. What a hypocrite. So his students wandered away. And monks in a village monastery like that are dependent on the village. If they provide the services that the village needs, the village provides them with the substance they need. And so it's this interbeing at play. And the villager said, Hakumen, what a hypocrite. I'm not giving him any more rice. We're not going to feed these people, these hypocrites. So the villager stopped supporting him. Hakumen went about raising this baby. And I don't know exactly how long it was, but later, and I'm imagining it was many months or maybe a year, I don't know. In the middle of the night, a timid knock at the door. And it was the young woman. And with her was a young man who was a fish seller in the village market. And the young woman said, I know that's not your baby. It's our baby. We want our baby back. And Hakumen handed the baby to the mother and said, oh, is that so? And she took the baby away. Now, I don't know how many of us are parents or have close relationships with little babies, but I imagine that Hakumen completely fell in love with this baby. How do you give up a baby like that? Is that so? He says. So I come back to this story over and over again because I've wondered, what is it about Hakumen that allows him to do this, to respond in that way? Just imagine you were threatened in that way. Someone came and took away your livelihood, your family, the things that made you what you think you are. Do you think you'd be able to respond and say, is that so? And shift your life immediately? I've been wondering about this for more than 40 years. I think we find ourselves in a similar threat right now that Hakumen found himself in. You know, as I mentioned, our government, parts of our government at least, have turned against us. Non-white immigrants are being rounded up and mistreated illegally. Sexual minorities are being scapegoated. Our president turns the power of the government against these people. That's a threat. That's a real threat to us. I think we're also threatened because our earth is under threat. This very precious planet that we have, and we know of no other place in the universe that could support life like this planet. We know of none other in an enormous universe. And yet, right now, our government is hiding climate science that might lead to changes because that protects rich people. That's a threat. Our society is threatened. We have turned against each other. You look at even something like the Anacortes Facebook page. I read that sometimes and I'm just amazed at the brutality of the way people post at each other. It's a threat to our society. Luckily, we're not the first humans to do this to each other. We might be the first to do it on a global scale, but humans have been doing this kind of stuff as long as there have been humans. We're not a very nice species to each other sometimes. But my question for us, can we learn to hold what we've been handed as gracefully as Hakumen took what he had been handed? What do we need to do to be able to take what has been handed to us, these threats, and respond with, oh, is that so? And turn. And I know that we can do it. And I know we can because Hakuin was a human being just like you and me. There's no difference. He wasn't magical. He wasn't special. He wasn't some kind of a god. He was a person just like you and me. So if Hakuin could do it, we can do it. That's good news. Let's look at those two things that I mentioned earlier, because I think this is the way forward for us. So the two things are the science of how our brain works and what the Buddha taught us about impermanence and non-self. These are the ways I think that we can find our way towards Hakuin's type of response. Let's start with the brain. A baby has an amazing brain, and it's not like the brain that we have as adults. And a baby is literally born with a beginner's mind. And we talk about beginner's mind all the time in Zen practice, but a baby is born with it. It's really amazing. And that baby's beginner mind is an exploration machine. You know, the baby has never seen the world. So the baby's brain is wired to have no preconceptions about anything at all, but just to explore everything, kind of on an equal basis. That's a beginner's mind. No preconceptions. And because a baby could encounter anything, it has this broad-ranging set of connections in its brain. It can learn Mandarin. It can learn to run. It can learn the foods it does and doesn't like. And that's going to be different in every culture, in every continent, in every country, every family. But the babies have to be wired to do all of it. So they have this amazing amount of brain connection. So a baby's brain is really kind of interesting. It consumes about 50% of the baby's caloric intake. 50%. And by the time they get to be 4 years old, they're consuming 60%. And a baby's brain weighs about 10% of its total body weight. That's a big, active brain. You've got to feed that brain a lot. By contrast, an adult's brain only uses about 20% of the calories we take in, and it's about 2% of our body weight. Now, the adult brain is a baby's brain pared down. We just pare it down because there's a saying in neurology, neurons that fire together, wire together. And as the baby starts to make all these connections, they begin to create ruts in their brain. Because they've seen an apple once, they've seen an apple twice, they begin to know what an apple is, and pretty soon it doesn't take so much energy anymore. When they see an apple, they already know what an apple is. They don't have to explore it. The exploring brain of a baby becomes the predicting brain of an adult. That's an enormous change. We have lobbed off so many connections we had as babies, and now we have a brain that predicts things. I've been thinking about this in an analogy. Imagine a baby's brain is like a field of snow. It's just flat. It can go any direction at all. It can see anything at all. It can respond to whatever is there. And so it can travel whatever direction the impulse arises. But as it starts to go and explore things, on this field of snow, it walks out in this direction and it leaves a little trail. And then it walks that trail again and it deepens the trail. And it walks the trail again and it deepens the trail. And before you know it, that field of snow that you could go anywhere has now deep ruts. And now the brain can only go easily down those ruts. The advantage of this is that as adults, it saves us so much energy. Can you imagine if we still had to have 60% of our calories just to feed our brain, our brain would be working really, really, really hard. So there's a reason that it pares down like that. But as an adult, when we encounter something new, when there's change, when there's loss, we have to climb up out of our ruts to find the new information. And that's a lot of work. And so change and loss for an adult brain is a very highly energy taxing activity. Now imagine, you see something new, what? You have no idea, you can't see, you've got to climb up out of your rut so you can look around and maybe go a little bit different direction than you have an existing neurological rut. That's how I think about this brain in terms of the field of snow. So what I want us to remember about this is that change and loss for an adult is energetically very costly. When we encounter something new, when our world changes, it brings us a kind of a sense of fatigue, a kind of brain burnout. We have to work so hard at it because our brain has been built to predict the future, and all of a sudden that doesn't work anymore, so we've got to climb up out of our rut and look around with our beginner's mind and try and figure things out. And eventually we'll create new ruts. So there's a lot of resistance to change in our brains. It's just wired that way. That's kind of the brain part of it. That the brain is initially as a baby, beginner's mind, goes any direction, but there's a high cost to it. As an adult, we have worn these deep ruts in our brain, and that's a low cost, but when we need to change or when there's loss, it takes a lot of energy and we resist it. We don't want to have to deal with that. We might want to think about watching that in ourselves. So imagine something in your life, or just think of something that's actually happening in your life that's causing you to have to change right now, to adjust to something that you don't like or don't want or didn't ask for. So just pull something like that to mind for a moment. Now maybe someone you love has gotten a difficult diagnosis. Maybe your job is under threat. Maybe someone you love has died. So as you pull that thought into your brain, notice how your body feels. Does your body feel a kind of resistance? Like, no, I want it to be like it was. Thich Nhat Hanh gave us lovely language with which we can actually respond to that sort of thing. So when we feel this kind of resistance in us, we can, instead of judging it or running away from it, we can meet it with kindness. We can say something like, "Thank you, my dear precious brain. I know this change is making you work so hard right now. But we know that that hard work is impermanent. We will adjust. We will be okay. But right now, while this is hard, I'm here for you. I'm grateful to you for all of the adjustment that you're doing, for the grief you're willing to feel, for the change you're willing to make." When we use language like that, it changes our relationship to our struggling mind from one of to one of love. You might try it and see what happens when you're faced with change, if language like that might help. Let's talk a little bit about the practice parts now. Impermanence is where I want to turn our attention. Now, the Buddha wasn't a brain scientist. He lived at a time when he did not have access to the kind of fMRIs and things like that that scientists can now use to understand how the brain actually works. So the Buddha wasn't a brain scientist, but he deeply studied what the brain created. And by that I mean the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions that our brain creates, our habits. And the Buddha mapped out which of our neurological ruts, that we were talking about in the snow analogy, which one of those cause us to suffer. Because it's not bad that we have these ruts. They're actually really helpful in a lot of ways. But some of them cause us to suffer. And that's why I want to talk about impermanence. Because that is one of the primary ruts that causes us to suffer so much. Now, the brain is designed to predict the future. That's what those ruts are. They save energy because the brain says, I've been down this road before, I know what's happening, we don't need to give a lot of energy to it, I know what an apple is. Right? But that brain that predicts the future is a brain that needs consistency. Right? In order for it to predict the future has to be just like the past. You hear a problem with that? Right? The future will not be like the past. Yeah, it is impermanent. But the brain operates on the assumption that everything is permanent. Otherwise, those pathways are useless. And a core truth about our world is that everything is impermanent. Everything that is created will die. Everything that is assembled will come apart. Everything that begins has an end. This is the nature of the world we live in, and that is at odds with the way our brain operates. Our brain assumes that what it learned in the past will be replicated in the future. So the bottom line here is that our brains are wired to see permanence. The world is impermanent, therefore we suffer. I'll say that again because it's really important. Our brains are wired to see permanence. The world is impermanent, therefore we suffer. We are not in alignment with the way things are, just because of the way our brains work. No wonder we suffer so much. No wonder. Now, our practice attempts to resolve this by bringing us face to face with impermanence. Our practice is trying to make one of those ruts in our brain the reality of impermanence, so that we are in concert with how things actually are, instead of how our brain might think they are. So I want to just mention a few of these things that our practice uses to do this. And every one of them we could do a whole practice period on. So I'm just going to kind of mention them. But I really want to encourage you, if one of these resonates with you, to pick up the practice of this yourself. The first one is, of course, the 5 remembrances. And the 5 remembrances, they're in our sutra book, and you've probably come across them. And this is particularly potent because if our brain's basic wiring craves permanence, then our brain finds it very difficult to deal with aging, illness, death, and loss. Very difficult. So we recite and experience the 5 remembrances over and over and over until those truths are deeply rooted into our brain. And then if we do that, we'll find that our expectations begin to harmonize with reality. So that's one. Another one is the 5 aggregates, the 5 skandhas. Now this one's a little bit more abstract, but this is worth spending a lot of time on. The 5 aggregates are one of the Buddha's teachings, and he's saying that all these things that we think are solid are actually made up of lots of things that are exactly the opposite of what we thought was solid. So for instance, our form is one of the skandhas. Our form. We think our form is constant, but it's not. It's always aging, always changing, eventually dying. Another skandha is our feelings. We think our feelings are permanent. I'm angry because you did something, and I'm going to be angry at you tomorrow. I'm going to be angry at you next week too. But if you look at your feelings, they're actually made up of non-feeling elements, and they don't last very long. I think the psychologists have done some studies, and they say that feelings last about 90 seconds if we don't feed them again and get them worked out. So these 5 skandhas, form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, are all made up of elements that are not what we think they are. They're these aggregates put together, and then they fall apart. So the practice here is to begin to see this everywhere. See that everything is impermanent, it falls apart, it's not what it appears to be on the surface. And that again puts us in alignment with the way reality actually is. You might want to come back to that. Now, that one's kind of abstract and more of a, I don't know, a study that really takes some Sangha time to do. But how about this one that we can do all the time, anywhere we are, and that's mindfulness of the breath. Mindfulness of the breath is something that the Buddha taught us in the Satipatthana Sutra. And it seems almost trivial. It's almost trivial to pay attention to the breath coming in, going out, and that little space before the next breath. What could we possibly benefit by paying attention to that? Right? But this is an intimate experience of impermanence. You take a breath in, and you take a breath out. You notice that space. That breath that you took in is gone. It's gone. And you've done billions of those breaths throughout your life. It came in, it went out, it's no longer here. Again and again. But we have this idea that we will breathe permanently. So try this for a minute. Take a breath in, mindfully, take a breath out, and then don't take another breath in. Just try that, see what happens. It's not long before you want that breath pretty bad, isn't it? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. So we follow our breath because it's our purest teacher. It's always right here with us. And it's constantly showing us impermanence. If you think you're permanent, just don't take that in-breath for a while. And feel that. Feel that struggle to live, that struggle to survive, that wants to pull in another breath. So our breath will teach us about impermanence if we only pay a little bit of attention to it. So I could go on and on, naming different practices. And I'd like to encourage you to think about your practice that you do and how it's related to impermanence, how it's related to helping our brain actually know the reality of impermanence so that we live in concert with reality. And I think you'll find that almost all of our practices are directly related to this. It's such an important transformational understanding. Take a look and see what you find in your practice. I mentioned at the beginning that the Buddha left us two main ways for us to work with our brain so that our brain is in better concert with reality. So one is impermanence, and the other one is non-self. Luckily, impermanence and non-self are the same thing. They're like two sides of the same coin. Look at it from this side, it's impermanence. Look at it from this side, it's non-self. So what do I mean by this? For instance, if I look at myself and I really realize that John is impermanent. I'm impermanent. I'm going to die. I'm changing all the time. I got to see it the other day. I was on a YouTube, and a talk that I gave some years ago popped up in front of me, and I thought, oh, that will be interesting. So I looked at it for a few minutes, and I thought, who is that guy? I didn't recognize what I was talking about. I don't remember saying those words. I've aged a lot since then. I'm not as sharp. I really saw my impermanence. So there I was, impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. So if I'm impermanent, as the 5 remembrances and the 5 skandhas and our breath practice and all these things say, then the idea of me, John, as a separate self can exist. I mean, you'd have to show me the permanent John that would have to exist for me to be a separate self. Can you show that to me? I can't find it. I can't find it. So if John is impermanent, John also is a non-self. I know maybe it's a little abstract. Play with it for a while. Look at it for yourself and see. Now, our broader culture might say that, well, maybe there is a permanent self. Maybe it's a soul, or maybe it's consciousness, or maybe it's this body. I don't know, we could debate all this stuff, but we won't do that tonight. And Zen is not big on debating a philosophy anyway. You know, we're more about looking directly at our own experience to find out things. But maybe you go home and try and find your separate self. And if you do, come back and tell us about it. Students have been trying to do this for a long time, and I don't know of anyone who has, but you might be the one. Give it a whirl. But instead, in Zen, we look diligently within, and then we apply the insights that arise to our actual lives. And I think one of the most important insights we have is when we realize that the idea that I'm a separate, permanent self is at the root of my suffering. I'll say that again. One of the most important insights that we can have is to realize that the idea that I am a separate, permanent self is at the root of my suffering. I am not a separate, permanent self. I am an interbeing with all of you. Let's go back to Hakuin. Now, how does this possibly relate back to Hakuin? And we talked about this old Japanese Zen master. But I think that if we can understand how our brain works, that it creates these deep ruts from past experience, and that it relies on those deep ruts to predict the future, and that is fundamentally at odds with how things actually are, the impermanent non-self nature of the world, then we can see how we suffer. And if we can see what Hakuin did to completely not resist that change, that non-self, that impermanence, by being handed the baby and saying, is that so? I think that gives us some insight into Hakuin's practices and the changes in Hakuin's brain. Now think for a minute, again, back to if you are threatened in your life. someone comes and tries to take away what's most precious to you, what's your reaction? I mean, be real here. I mean, we don't want to idealize ourselves. You're probably going to fight, right? You're going to be angry. You're going to blame somebody else. You're going to do all the things that we humans do. But that's not what Hakuin did. Hakuin just said, oh, is that so? I think maybe the difference between Hakuin and us is that Hakuin had been practicing diligently for a very long time. And that diligent practice left him with fewer and shallower ruts in his mind, in his brain. Now just imagine if you're constantly reassessing those ruts that tell you you are a separate permanent self, and you're practicing diligently with the 5 remembrances, and you're realizing more and more deeply that you are impermanent. That rut that says I'm a separate self is going to get shallower and shallower until pretty soon you're back to beginner's mind again and able to go any direction. And I think that's what happened for Hakuin. I think Hakuin practiced deeply and well for a long time, and it gave him more of a beginner's mind than we have. So he was able to turn on a dime when his life was challenged. Hakuin practiced what Thich Nhat Hanh calls mindfulness. Well, there's nothing different about what Hakuin did than what we do. Mindfulness means coming home again and again to the present moment. In other words, climbing up out of our rut. It's the same thing, coming back to the present moment, seeing things as they are. And it gives us the ability to move freely with the beginner's mind on top of the snow. So when Hakuin was handed that baby, those pathways that said, I am a Zen master, I am a poet, I am a calligrapher, I imagine they were actually pretty shallow. And he could easily just step right out of them. Oh, is that so? It looks like I'm a father. Take the baby. Hakuin didn't suffer when he lost his titles and he lost his daily routine, because his practice had showed him moment by moment that he never was those things. He didn't have an identification with being a Zen master or a poet or an abbot. He was just living. And that's how he spent his time. And we can do that too. We can hold these things about us that we think are so important much, much more gently than we do. But I don't think he always had that kind of a subtle mind. Maybe when he was a young person, and if he'd have been accused of fathering a baby he didn't father, he might have reacted like you and I. No way, it's not mine. Get out of here. But his practice made it so his mind was supple. The question is, how do we practice to do this? How can we give ourselves that kind of a supple mind like that? Well, the good news is that it's very simple. But the bad news is that it's very challenging. Yeah. Our practice really is designed to counter this brain's tendency to create ruts. So there's really only three steps we have to think about, or 4 steps maybe, to think about doing for this kind of a practice. And the first one is this: we notice with clarity whatever is arising in us. All right? That's mindfulness, as Thich Nhat Hanh would describe it. We notice with clarity what's arising in us. So that would be our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our automatic reactions that we have. We notice those things. Simple, right? Yeah. Then the second step, once we've noticed those things, we label them. We just call them what they are. So, rumination. That's what's arising in me now. Anger. Anger's here. Maybe judgment, jealousy, I don't know, desire for ice cream. That arises in me a lot. No, something arises, we give it a label. 2 easy steps. And then the third step, after we've done that, we just return to the present moment. And we open our hearts and notice with our beginner's mind. And then something else arises, we give it a label, we return to the present moment. Something else arises, we give it a label, we return to the present moment. The fourth step would be just repeat all that over and over and over and over again. Now the advantage that Hakuin had over us is that he lived in a monastery. Much easier to do in a monastery because you're surrounded by people who are doing just that. And so it makes it easier for us to do that. It's easier because we're not separate beings, we're interbeings. So when one of us is doing that, it makes it easier for the others of us to do that. We don't have that, so that makes it a little bit more challenging. But it doesn't make it impossible. And it's not magic. It's not magic. The Buddha had Buddha nature, Hakuin had Buddha nature, and every one of us here has Buddha nature. We can do it. We can do it. The only difference between Buddha and Hakuin and us is diligence of practice. That's it. Now, I talked to a couple people about this over the last few days, and they both had the same, yeah, but. So I want to address the yeah, but, because I imagine you probably have a yeah, but in your mind right now. And so this is the yeah, but that I heard. Yeah, but am I supposed to just accept everything? Aren't I supposed to stand up against injustice and do the right thing? Yes and yes. So let me unpack that a little bit. I think Zen is sometimes mistaken as a passive act. That we are good practitioners if we never get upset and angry, if we never have desires. That would make us a good practitioner, but that's not the case. I come back a lot to our 2 models of compassion. There's Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara practices that sort of open-hearted receiving of the world, the way I've been describing it tonight. That simply seeing what's coming, accepting it, and it's a lovely expression of compassion. To be that person in the room who can just receive whatever's happening is a gift to everyone. And so that is one of our faces of compassion. Hakuin did that. When Hakuin accepted the baby, that was Avalokiteshvara, accepting the baby without any argument or fight. But that's just one face of compassion. There's another important face of compassion that has a very different looking reaction, and that is Manjushri. Manjushri, pictured with the sword of insight to cut through the BS and get right to the heart of it. And that is also a compassionate act that we can have. Manjushri's kind of compassion responds to suffering with clear, decisive action. So sometimes compassion isn't just listening. Sometimes compassion is speaking truth to power, right? Sometimes compassion is all of us standing up together to resist the injustice that's going on around us. Compassion means cutting through that BS and the delusional cruelty that is being created in our society. And we have to do that because we have to protect the vulnerable. If we have the ability to do it, we need to do it. Our world is so full of delusional cruelty right now. It's so full. Our challenge really is to practice deeply and well, so that when we have access to our own wisdom and insight, that we can stand up and make that real in the world. For me, it's really clear. My dearest friend Michael is gay. I'm straight. I've had this amazing welcoming into the world of sexual minorities, and I am so clear that if I have an ability to stand up to support sexual minorities, I will do it in a heartbeat. I will do it. And that might not be what you do, but I know that each one of you has insights about what's right and what's wrong, and each one of you knows when and where you can stand up and protect the vulnerable. So I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you whether you should calmly witness the next outrage that happens so that you can then broaden your heart's compassion and be that Avalokiteshvara in the world that gives other people stability. I can't tell you whether you should be the person to pick up a sign and join in the rallies that happen in town here regularly, or the No Kings rallies. I can't tell you whether you should write your congressperson to talk about things. I can't tell you whether you should be the person to get arrested if ICE comes to town and you need to put yourself between the persecuted person and the ICE agent. I can't tell you if it's best for you to go in the woods and sob. I don't know. Only you can know. Only you can know. And every one of us needs you to practice diligently and deeply so that you have the internal clarity to know what your truth is and when to stand up for it. We all need you because everyone in this room will do it differently, and I can't do it like you, but I need you to do it with me. I need you to do it with me. So I need you to gain clarity by practicing diligently, by listening to your own Buddha nature so that you are clear about your insight, and then you act with integrity. I want to end just by wondering, our damaged, suffering world is pounding on each one of our doors right now. Bang, bang, bang. And it is handing each one of us a baby. What will you do? What will you do?